The crosshairs settled perfectly on the bridge of his nose. Through the high-powered lens, I could see the sweat beading on Judge Mason's forehead as he walked to his car. He was laughing. He had just let a murderer walk free, and now he was laughing about it. I exhaled, my breath clouding in the freezing night air. My finger hovered over the trigger. It would be so easy. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. 22 years in Black Ops teaches you one thing above all else: discipline. You don't take the shot just because you're angry. You take the shot when the mission is clear, when the variable is isolated, and when the outcome is guaranteed. Tonight, the outcome wasn't guaranteed. I watched through the scope as Judge Mason unlocked his silver sedan. He looked like a man without a care in the world. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and he moved with the arrogance of someone who knew he was untouchable. Why wouldn't he feel untouchable? He had just looked me in the eye inside that courtroom 3 hours ago and told me that there was insufficient evidence to convict the boy who put a bullet in my son's chest. 14 times. That was the number of times Julian, the shooter, had been arrested before. 14 times he had been in front of a judge. 14 times his daddy's money, or a clerical error, or a missing witness had sent him back out onto the street. And today was number 15. I lowered the rifle, resting the heavy barrel on the wet concrete of the parking garage ledge. The rain was coming down hard now, washing the grime off the city streets, but it couldn't wash away the rot inside that courthouse. I looked down at the parking lot below. Julian was there too. He was standing by a bright red sports car, high-fiving his lawyer. My stomach twisted. It felt like I had swallowed broken glass. That boy, he wasn't even a man, just a kid with dead eyes and a rich father, had shot my Evan over a parking spot. A parking spot. Evan was 19. He was packing his car for college. He had his whole life mapped out. He was going to be an engineer. He had a girlfriend named Violet who still came by our house to cry with my wife. And Julian ended it all because he didn't want to walk an extra 50 feet to the store entrance. I watched Julian get into his car. I could have ended him right there. A slight adjustment of windage, a half breath out, and the red mist would cover that expensive leather interior. But that wasn't the mission. Killing Julian would just make me a murderer. It wouldn't fix the system that let him go. It wouldn't hurt the man who banged the gavel. My target wasn't the hand that held the gun. It was the hand that signed the papers. Judge Mason pulled out of the lot, his taillights blurring in the rain. I memorized the license plate, even though I already had it written in the dossier back in my truck. I broke down my rifle with practiced movements. Click, snap, slide. Within 30 seconds, the long-range instrument of death was just a collection of metal parts inside an innocent-looking gym bag. I stood up, my knees popping. I was 45, but tonight I felt 80. The grief was a physical weight, like a rucksack full of stones I couldn't take off. I walked to my truck, a beat-up Ford that blended in anywhere. I climbed in and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could still hear the judge's voice. Mr. Victor, while the court sympathizes with your loss, the prosecution has failed to meet the burden of proof regarding intent. Sympathizes. He didn't sympathize. He checked his watch 3 times during the victim impact statement. He looked bored while my wife, Tessa, sobbed into a tissue, trying to tell the court what a good boy Evan was. I started the engine. The heater rattled to life, blowing lukewarm air into the cab. I wasn't going to kill Judge Mason tonight. That was too quick, too merciful. Men like him, men who sold justice for favors or money, they didn't deserve a quick exit. They deserved to lose everything first. They deserved to feel the fear. They deserved to look over their shoulder every time they walked to their car. I pulled out of the garage, keeping a safe distance, but I turned in the direction of the judge's home address, not mine. I needed to see where he slept. I needed to see the fortress he thought kept him safe. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was Tessa. I stared at the screen. I couldn't answer. What was I supposed to say? I'm sorry I'm late. Honey, I was deciding whether or not to assassinate a government official. I let it go to voicemail. I drove through the city, the windshield wipers slapping a steady rhythm. Guilty, guilty, guilty. I reached the suburbs. The houses here were large, set back from the road behind iron gates and manicured hedges. This was where the judge lived. Safe, secure, far away from the convenience store parking lot where my son bled out on the asphalt. I parked 3 streets over. I grabbed a different bag from the back seat, my surveillance kit. I didn't need a rifle for this part. I needed eyes. I moved through the shadows between the houses. I moved like I used to in the desert, silent and invisible. The wet grass didn't make a sound under my boots. I reached the perimeter of Mason's property. The lights were on inside. I raised my binoculars. I saw him. He was in his kitchen. He was pouring a drink. Amber liquid, probably expensive scotch. He took a sip and leaned against the counter, smiling. Then, someone else walked into the frame. A woman. His wife, presumably. She kissed him on the cheek. He laughed, patting her shoulder. A happy family. A safe home. He had destroyed my family to protect his own comfort. I watched them for an hour. I cataloged the entry points. I noted the alarm company sign in the yard. I clocked the time the motion sensor lights triggered on the driveway. He thought the trial was over. He thought he had banged that gavel and washed his hands of Evan's death. He was wrong. I wasn't a grieving father anymore. Not tonight. Tonight, I was an operator. And Judge Mason wasn't a judicial officer. He was a target package. I slipped back into the darkness, making my way back to the truck. I had seen enough for tonight. I knew where he lived. I knew his routine. But as I drove home, a thought nagged at me. Why did he do it? The case against Julian was strong. We had witnesses. We had ballistics. Why would a judge with 20 years on the bench risk his career for a punk kid like Julian? Was it just money? Or was it something else? I pulled into my own driveway around midnight. The house was dark, but the porch light was on. Tessa always left it on for me. I walked inside. The house was quiet. That heavy, suffocating silence that only exists in a home where a child has died. I walked down the hallway, past Evan's room. The door was closed. We hadn't opened it in 3 months. I went into our bedroom. Tessa was asleep, but she had been crying. I could tell by the way her breathing hitched, even in sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my jacket. I looked at the framed photo on the nightstand. It was Evan at his graduation, smiling, alive. I reached out and touched the glass. I promise you, I whispered to the boy in the picture. I'm going to find out why, and then I'm going to take them all down. I stood up to go to the bathroom to wash the rain off my face. I took off my jacket and threw it on the chair. As I did, a piece of paper fell out of my pocket. I frowned. I hadn't put any paper in my pocket. I picked it up. It was a small, folded note. Plain white paper. I unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. You're looking at the wrong man. The judge didn't want to let him go. He had to. My blood ran cold. Someone had slipped this into my pocket. When? At the courthouse. In the parking garage. I stared at the note. If the judge was forced to let Julian go, then who was pulling the strings? I stared at the crumpled note in my hand until the words blurred together. You're looking at the wrong man. The judge didn't want to let him go. He had to. The paper felt heavy, like it was made of lead. I turned it over, looking for a fingerprint, a smudge, anything. Nothing. It was standard printer paper, the kind you can buy at any office supply store in the country. But the message changed everything. If Judge Mason was forced to let Julian walk, that meant my mission parameters were wrong. In the military, if your intel is bad, you abort. You regroup. You don't take the shot. But I wasn't in the military anymore. I was a father standing in his hallway at midnight, listening to the silence of a house that should have been full of life. I shoved the note deep into my pocket as I heard the bedroom door creak open behind me. Victor. I turned around. Tessa was standing in the doorway, wrapped in her old robe. She looked so small. In the 3 months since Evan died, she had lost 20 pounds. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. "I'm here, Tess," I said, my voice rough. "Just getting some water." She walked over to me and rested her head against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her, but I felt stiff, rigid. My body was still in combat mode, adrenaline pumping through my veins from the stakeout at the judge's house. I forced myself to exhale, to soften my shoulders. "I had that dream again," she whispered into my shirt. "The one where he comes home for Thanksgiving." My chest tightened. "Tess." "I heard the car door slam," she said, her voice trembling. "In the dream, I heard his car door slam and I ran to the window, and he was there. He was getting his laundry bag out of the trunk." She pulled back and looked up at me, fresh tears spilling over. "Why do I keep waking up, Victor? Why can't I just stay in the dream?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how to fix this. I knew how to calculate wind speed and bullet drop. I knew how to track a target through a dense jungle. But I didn't know how to fix a mother's broken heart. "Go back to bed," I said gently. "I'll be there in a minute." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and shuffled back into the bedroom. I didn't follow her immediately. Instead, I walked down the hall to the door we never opened. Evan's room. I turned the knob. It felt cold. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled like stale air and the faint, lingering scent of his body spray, something cheap and musky that he wore too much of. His bed was still unmade, the sheets tangled just like he left them that morning. His guitar was in the corner. His acceptance letter to the university was still pinned to the corkboard above his desk. "Congratulations, Evan. We are pleased to inform you. He never got to go. He never got to pack his bags." I sat down on the edge of his bed. The rage that had been a cold knot in my stomach all night suddenly flared up, hot and blinding. Julian, the shooter, was sleeping in a soft bed tonight. He was probably laughing about how he beat the system. And Judge Mason. If the note was true, Judge Mason was sleeping in his mansion, terrified of someone. But who? I stood up and walked to Evan's desk. I needed to think. I needed to work. I pulled out my laptop, not the family computer, but the secure one I kept for consulting work. I sat in Evan's gaming chair and typed in the password. I started digging. First, I looked up Judge Mason again. Nothing unusual. Clean record, charitable donations, pillar of the community. Then I typed in the name of the shooter's father, Grant Holloway. The screen filled with results. Grant Holloway wasn't just rich. He was old money rich. Real estate, shipping, construction. The kind of money that buys buildings, politicians, and silence. But as I scrolled through the articles, I found something interesting. A connection. Grant Holloway owned a private security firm called Aegis Solutions. It was a subsidiary of his shipping company. They handled high-risk transport. Mercenaries in corporate suits. I leaned closer to the screen. If Holloway had his own private army, intimidation would be easy for him. I went back to Judge Mason. I searched for his family. Wife, 2 kids, a son in college, and a daughter. I froze. Eliza Mason, age 16. I clicked on her social media profiles. They were public. Lots of selfies, pictures with friends, cheerleading photos. Normal teenager stuff. But then I noticed the dates. Her last post was 3 weeks ago. Since then, radio silence. No updates. No stories. No tagged photos from friends. For a teenage girl in 2026, going dark on social media for 3 weeks was unusual. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was a pattern. I checked the dates again. 3 weeks ago was exactly when the trial dates were set. It was exactly when the prosecution suddenly lost a key piece of evidence. The note in my pocket felt heavier. He had to. If Holloway had snatched the judge's daughter or threatened her, that would explain the insufficient evidence. That would explain the verdict. I closed the laptop. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't sleep. I grabbed my keys and went back out to the truck. I needed to know if Eliza Mason was safe. If she was home, maybe the note was a lie. If she was missing, then the judge was a victim, just like me. I drove back to the judge's neighborhood. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black. I parked in the same spot, 3 streets over, and hiked back to the perimeter of his property. The house was dark now. I set up in a patch of ornamental trees near the back fence. I had my thermal monocular this time. I scanned the house. Heat signatures. 2 in the master bedroom. The judge and his wife. I scanned the other rooms upstairs. Empty. 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 I checked the guest house. Empty. There was no third heat signature. No daughter. My heart hammered against my ribs. Where was Eliza? I waited. Hours passed. The sun began to creep up, turning the sky a bruised purple. At 6 a.m., the back door opened. Judge Mason stepped out onto the patio. He was wearing a robe, holding a cup of coffee. Through the binoculars, I saw his face clearly in the morning light. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a month. His skin was gray. His eyes were sunken. He pulled a phone out of his pocket. He stared at it, hesitating. Then he dialed. He put the phone to his ear. He didn't speak. He just listened. I focused on his face. I saw his lip tremble. I saw a single tear track down his cheek. He nodded, once, terrified. He ended the call and slumped into a patio chair, putting his head in his hands. He wasn't acting like a man who had just won. He was acting like a man who was being held hostage in his own home. Suddenly, the back door opened again. His wife came out. She put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, a hard, violent flinch, before realizing it was her. He grabbed her hand and held it to his face, and I could see his shoulders shaking. He was sobbing. I lowered the binoculars. The note was right. I had spent the last 3 months hating this man. I had spent last night looking at him through a rifle scope, ready to end his life. But he wasn't the monster. He was a father who had made a deal with the devil to save his child. A cold realization washed over me. If Grant Holloway had the judge's daughter, then the system was never going to work. The police couldn't help. The FBI couldn't help. Not without getting the girl killed. The only person who could help was someone who existed outside the system. Someone who knew how to hunt. Someone who had nothing left to lose. I stood up slowly, my joints stiff from the cold. I wasn't going to kill Judge Mason. I was going to use him. I needed to get close to him. I needed him to tell me exactly where Grant Holloway was keeping his daughter. And once I saved her, once the leverage was gone, then I would go for the throat. I turned to leave, but as I stepped back, my boot crunched on a dry branch. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet morning. On the patio, Judge Mason's head snapped up. He looked straight at the tree line. Straight at me. He didn't yell. He didn't run inside. He stared right at the spot where I was hidden, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was hope. I didn't leave the tree line immediately. I waited until Judge Mason went back inside his house, the heavy glass door clicking shut and locking him back into his golden cage. My mission had shifted. Yesterday, I wanted to put a bullet in him. Today, I needed to become his shadow. If I wanted to find his daughter and get to Grant Holloway, the man who actually ordered my son's death, I needed to hear every word the judge said. I needed to know who was pulling his strings. I hiked back to my truck, my mind already running through the inventory of my surveillance kit. I had a magnetic GPS tracker and a high-gain audio bug, leftover gear from a contracting job in South America 3 years ago. The battery life was only about 48 hours, but that was all I needed. I drove to a spot about a mile down the road from the entrance to his subdivision. I parked behind a utility shed near the main road and waited. It took him 40 minutes to leave the house. When his silver sedan passed me, I pulled out, keeping 2 cars between us. He wasn't driving like a man in a hurry. He was driving like a man who was terrified of where he was going. He pulled into a gas station about 5 miles from the courthouse. It was a high-end place with a coffee shop attached. I watched him get out. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked, and he was rubbing his temples as if he had a migraine that wouldn't quit. This was my window. I waited until he walked into the store. I grabbed the small black pouch from my passenger seat and opened the door. I moved fast, keeping low. I didn't run. Running draws attention. I walked with purpose, cutting through the blind spots of the other cars at the pumps. I reached his sedan. I dropped to one knee, pretending to tie my shoe. In one smooth motion, I reached under the rear bumper and slapped the magnetic GPS box against the frame. Then, I slid the audio bug into the wheel well, tucking it up high where a casual inspection wouldn't find it. I was back in my truck before he even paid for his coffee. I put on my headset and synced the receiver. The audio hissed with static, then cleared. I could hear the thrum of the gas station, the distant sound of traffic. A moment later, the driver's door opened. Thunk. The sound was crisp. I could hear the rustle of his suit jacket and the heavy, shaky breath he let out as he sat down. Pull yourself together, Adrian, he whispered to himself. Just pull it together. His voice sounded broken. It was strange hearing him like this. In the courtroom, he had been a titan. He had looked down at me with cold, imperious eyes while he let my son's killer go. But here, in the privacy of his car, he was just a scared old man. He started the engine. I watched on my laptop screen as the red dot began to move toward the city. I followed, listening. For 20 minutes, there was nothing but the radio playing low classical music. Then his phone rang. The car's Bluetooth picked it up. Hello. Mason's voice was tight. Did you sleep well, Your Honor? The voice on the other end was smooth, deep, and mocking. It wasn't a digital mask this time. It was a real person. A man. Please, Mason said, his voice cracking. I did what you asked. The verdict is in. Julian is free. He's already out of the country, I assume. Now let me talk to her. You said if I did it, you'd let her go. I said we would consider letting her go, the man said. But the situation has evolved. Julian is safe, yes. But his father is concerned about loose ends. I am not a loose end, Mason shouted, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. The audio spiked in my headset. I am the only reason that boy isn't in prison. I destroyed my career for you. I destroyed a family for you. My hands tightened on my own steering wheel. I destroyed a family. Hearing him admit it sent a fresh wave of rage through me, but I pushed it down. I needed the intel. Calm down, Adrian, the man said. Grant Holloway is a generous man. He wants to ensure your continued loyalty. There is a file in your chambers. The sealed evidence regarding the port expansion project. The environmental impact report. That has nothing to do with the shooting, Mason stammered. Everything has to do with everything, the voice said coldly. Bring the file. Tonight. Midnight. The old shipyard, warehouse 4. Come alone. If we see police, if we see anyone. Eliza pays the price. I can't just take that file. It's court property. Then I guess you don't want to see your daughter again. Do you know she asked for you this morning? She's very scared, Adrian. Don't you touch her. Mason screamed. I'll bring it. I'll bring the file. Just don't hurt her. The line went dead. I sat there in traffic, my heart pounding. Warehouse 4. The old shipyard. I knew that place. It was abandoned 10 years ago. It was a labyrinth of rusting shipping containers and rotting piers. Perfect for a meeting you didn't want anyone to see. And perfect for an ambush. Grant Holloway wasn't just protecting his son. He was using the leverage to clean up his business mess too. He was using the judge to steal evidence on a completely different crime. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It was 9 a.m. I had 15 hours until the meeting. I continued to follow the judge to the courthouse, but I hung back. I didn't need to be close anymore. I knew where he was going tonight. I drove home instead. I needed to prepare. I walked into my garage and locked the door. I pulled the tarp off the workbench in the back. Underneath was the gear I hadn't touched since I left the service. I picked up my ghillie suit, too bulky for an urban environment. I tossed it aside. I needed dark clothing, tight-fitting, non-reflective. I needed my night vision goggles. And I needed a weapon. I looked at the gun safe. I had my long-range rifle, the one I had almost used last night. But a shipyard was close quarters. It was tight corners and shadows. A sniper rifle was useless there. I reached for my sidearm. A custom 1911. Reliable. Heavy. But if I went in there shooting, Eliza might get caught in the crossfire. I needed to be a ghost. I spent the afternoon cleaning my gear, moving with a mechanical rhythm. Every time I stopped moving, I thought about Evan. I thought about the way he used to laugh. I thought about the hole in his chest. Grant Holloway did that. Grant Holloway raised a son who treated human life like a video game, and then he used his money to cover it up. And now he was kidnapping teenage girls to cover up his business crimes. He wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was a cancer. At 10 p.m., I kissed Tessa on the forehead while she slept. She barely stirred. She was on sedatives the doctor had prescribed. It was the only way she could get more than an hour of rest. "I love you," I whispered. "I'm going to make it right." I drove to the shipyard. I parked a mile away, in a derelict lot overgrown with weeds. I moved on foot towards the water. The smell of salt and rotting fish hung in the air. The shipyard was a skeleton of industry. Huge cranes loomed overhead like dinosaur bones against the moonlight. I moved through the shadows, stepping carefully over rusted chains and debris. Warehouse 4 was at the end of the main pier. It was a massive corrugated metal structure. I didn't go to the front door. I circled around the side, climbing a stack of old pallets to reach a broken window about 15 feet up. I slipped inside. It was pitch black, but my night vision turned the world into glowing green shapes. The warehouse was mostly empty, except for a few crates in the center. And a chair. There was a chair in the middle of the floor, under a single hanging light bulb that wasn't turned on yet. I climbed up into the rafters, settling onto a steel beam about 30 feet above the floor. I had a perfect view of the center of the room. I waited. At 11:55 p.m., headlights swept across the high windows. A car engine approached and cut off. The large bay door rolled open with a screech of metal on metal. Judge Mason walked in. He was clutching a thick manila folder to his chest like a shield. He looked tiny in the cavernous space. "I'm here," he called out, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "I have the file. Where is she?" For a long moment, there was silence. Then, from the shadows on the far side of the warehouse, 3 men stepped out. They were dressed in tactical gear. Not police. Private military. Aegis Solutions. One of them, a tall man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stepped forward. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a phone. "Put the file on the chair, Adrian," the man said. "Where is Eliza?" Mason demanded, taking a step forward. "You said you'd bring her." "I said we'd consider it," the man smirked. "Put the file down. Then you can go home and wait for our next instruction." "No," Mason yelled. "I'm not giving you anything until I see my daughter." The man with the scar sighed. He snapped his fingers. Another man stepped out from the darkness behind him. He was dragging someone. It was Eliza. She looked worse than she did in the photos. Her clothes were torn, her face was bruised, and she was barely walking. She was stumbling, her eyes unfocused. "Drugged." "Eliza!" Mason screamed, dropping the folder and running toward her. "Ah, ah, ah," the scarred man said, pulling a pistol and pointing it at the girl's head. "Stay right there, Judge." Mason froze. He was 10 feet away from them. He was shaking violently. "Please," Mason sobbed, falling to his knees. "Please just let her go. I did everything. I gave you Julian. I gave you the file. Take me. Take me instead." "We don't need you, Adrian," the scarred man said, racking the slide of his pistol. "We have the verdict. We have the file. And frankly, you're becoming a liability." The scarred man didn't look at the file. He didn't look at the judge. He raised the gun, aiming it right between the judge's eyes. "Say goodbye, Your Honor." I stopped breathing. My hand flew to my holster. I drew my 1911. I was 30 feet up. The shot was steep. I had to miss the girl, miss the judge, and hit a moving target in the head. If I missed, they would kill them both. If I did nothing, they died. If I took the shot, I was declaring war on the most powerful man in the city. I didn't hesitate. I squeezed the trigger. The deafening crack of my 1911 echoed through the metal warehouse like a thunderclap. The round struck the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around violently. His pistol flew from his hand, skittering across the concrete floor. He didn't scream. Not yet. He just hit the ground hard, clutching his chest. Chaos erupted. Sniper. High right. One of the mercenaries shouted, diving behind a crate. The other man, the one holding Eliza, tried to drag her backward into the darkness. She was dead weight, her feet dragging on the floor, too drugged to understand that bullets were flying over her head. I didn't stay in the rafters. A stationary sniper is a dead sniper. I holstered my pistol and grabbed the rappel line I had rigged earlier. I kicked off the beam, sliding down the rope in a controlled freefall. I hit the ground in a crouch behind a stack of shipping pallets, 30 feet from the judge. Stay down. I roared at Mason. The judge was frozen, staring at the man bleeding out on the floor. He looked like a deer in headlights. The mercenary behind the crate popped up to fire. I was faster. I double-tapped the wood right where his head was. He ducked back down, swearing. Let her go. I yelled at the man holding Eliza. Walk away and you live. Who are you? The man screamed back, his voice cracking. He had a knife pressed to Eliza's throat now, using her as a human shield. Show yourself. I pulled a flashbang from my vest. It was old, but military-grade ordnance has a long shelf life. I pulled the pin and tossed it over the pallets. Close your eyes. I shouted. I squeezed my own eyes shut and turned away. Bang. The flash was blinding even through my eyelids, and the concussion shook the dust from the ceiling. I moved. I vaulted the pallets and sprinted across the open floor. The man holding Eliza was staggering, rubbing his eyes, the knife swinging wildly in the air. I didn't shoot him. I didn't want to risk hitting the girl. I closed the distance in 3 seconds. I slammed the butt of my pistol into his temple. He dropped like a sack of cement. Eliza collapsed, but I caught her before she hit the floor. She was light, fragile. Her eyes were rolling back in her head. Dad, she mumbled, her voice thick and slurred. I've got you, I said, hoisting her over my shoulder. I turned to the judge. He was still on his knees, hands over his ears. Get up. I grabbed his collar and hauled him to his feet. We have to move. Now. I spotted the manila folder, the environmental report they wanted so badly, lying in a puddle of dirty water near the chair. I snatched it up and shoved it into my jacket. Run. I shoved the judge toward the side exit I had used to enter. We burst out into the cool night air. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had heard the shots. But it wasn't the police I was worried about. It was the backup team Grant Holloway surely had on standby. My car. Mason stammered, pointing to his sedan. Forget the car. I barked. It's burned. Get in the truck. I led them to my pickup parked in the weeds. I threw Eliza into the back seat and pushed the judge in after her. I jumped into the driver's seat and floored it, tires spinning in the mud before gripping the pavement. We sped away from the shipyard, weaving through the industrial backroads to avoid the main highway. For 10 minutes, nobody spoke. The only sound was the engine roaring and Eliza's soft whimpering in the back seat. When I finally hit the interstate, heading north away from the city, I checked the rearview mirror. Judge Mason was holding his daughter, rocking her back and forth. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. The streetlights flickered across his face, revealing a mix of terror and confusion. He squinted, looking at the back of my head, then at my eyes in the reflection. Recognition slowly dawned on him. I know you, he whispered, his voice trembling. I saw you in my courtroom every day for 3 weeks. He swallowed hard. You're Evan's father. I didn't look back. I just kept my eyes on the road, my grip tightening on the wheel. Yeah, I said, cold as ice. I am. You saved us, he stammered. After what I did. Why? I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it because I know what it feels like to lose a child. And I wasn't going to let that man put you in the same club. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the damp manila folder, tossing it onto the passenger seat. Now, I said, you're going to tell me exactly what's in that file. And you're going to tell me how we use it to bury Grant Holloway. I drove for another 20 minutes before I felt safe enough to pull over. We were in the middle of nowhere, farm country, empty roads, nothing but fields of winter wheat stretching out under the moonlight. I turned onto a dirt access road and killed the headlights. The truck rolled to a stop next to an old grain silo. I turned around in my seat and looked at the judge. He was still holding Eliza, her head resting against his shoulder. She was breathing, but her eyes were half closed, unfocused. Whatever they had pumped into her system was still working its way through her bloodstream. Is she going to be okay? I asked. Mason nodded, his hands trembling as he brushed the hair out of her face. I think so. They kept her sedated. They told me it was just to keep her calm, but I didn't know if. His voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence. I grabbed a water bottle from the cup holder and handed it back to him. Get some fluids in her. We need her awake and coherent. If she knows anything about where they were keeping her, we can use it. Mason took the bottle with shaking hands. He tilted it to Eliza's lips, whispering softly, Eliza, honey, drink. Please. Just a little bit. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I turned back around and opened the manila folder on my lap. I clicked on the dome light. Inside were dozens of pages, environmental impact assessments, zoning permits, inspection reports. All of them stamped with official seals. All of them related to something called the Port Expansion Project, Phase 3. I flipped through the pages, scanning the technical jargon. Soil contamination, hazardous waste dumping, groundwater pollution. There were photos too, barrels of chemicals buried in shallow pits near the waterfront, midnight deliveries of unmarked trucks. And at the bottom of every approval form, every inspection waiver, every permit extension, there were signatures, city officials, port authority directors, environmental regulators. And one name appeared over and over again, Holloway Shipping and Logistics. They were dumping toxic waste, I said, looking back at the judge. Holloway's company was cutting costs by illegally disposing of chemicals instead of processing them properly. And he paid off half the city to look the other way. Mason closed his eyes. His face was gray. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear, I didn't know what was in that file until 2 days ago. They told me it was just paperwork, just a formality. A formality, I said, my voice hardening. People are going to die from this. Kids are going to get cancer from drinking water that's been poisoned because Grant Holloway wanted to save a few $1 million. I know, Mason shouted, his voice breaking. I know what I did. But they had my daughter. What would you have done? I stared at him. He was right. If it had been Evan, if someone had taken Evan and told me to choose between him and a stranger, I would have burned the whole world down to save my son. But Evan was already gone. I exhaled slowly, forcing the anger back down. What else did they tell you? I asked. About the shooting. About Julian. Why did he kill my son? Mason looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. They didn't tell me much. But I overheard things. When they called me. When they threatened me. Tell me, I said. He swallowed hard. Your son wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. Julian was sent there. He was told to eliminate a witness. My chest tightened. A witness to what? I don't know, Mason said quickly. I swear, I don't know the details. But Evan saw something. He was at the port. He took pictures. I froze. Pictures. Evan had been working a summer job. He was a loader at a shipping warehouse near the docks. He needed the money for textbooks. He worked nights, graveyard shifts, loading containers onto trucks. I never thought anything of it. They found out Evan had evidence. Mason continued, his voice shaking. Photos of the trucks. Maybe photos of the barrels. I don't know. But Holloway found out, and he sent Julian to deal with it. Deal with it, I repeated, my voice hollow. You mean murder a 19-year-old kid in broad daylight? Yes, Mason whispered. I sat there in the silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Evan wasn't random. He wasn't collateral damage in some spoiled rich kid's tantrum. He was executed. And Julian, the arrogant, smirking boy I had watched walk out of that courtroom, wasn't just a killer. He was an assassin, a tool his father used to protect his empire. Where is Julian now? I asked, my voice cold and steady. Mason shook his head. I don't know. They said he was out of the country. Holloway has properties everywhere. South America, Southeast Asia, Europe. He could be anywhere. I nodded slowly. And Holloway? Where does he live? He has an estate outside the city, Mason said. But it's a fortress. Private security, cameras, gates. You can't just walk in there. I'm not planning to walk, I said. Mason looked at me, his face pale. What are you going to do? I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. I scrolled back, months and months, until I found what I was looking for. A picture Evan had sent me in July. It was a selfie. He was wearing his work uniform, standing in front of a shipping container, grinning with a thumbs up. The caption read, "Last shift before school. Finally escaping this dump." But in the background, just barely visible, was a truck. And on the side of that truck was a logo, Holloway Shipping and Logistics. I zoomed in. The truck's rear door was open. Inside, I could see the edge of a barrel, black, industrial, with a hazard symbol stenciled on the side. Evan had photographed the evidence without even knowing it. I looked back at the judge. Did Holloway's people check Evan's phone after they killed him? Mason hesitated. I think so. They mentioned something about cleaning up digital evidence. Why? Because they didn't get everything, I said, holding up my phone. Evan sent me this picture 2 weeks before he died. It's still on my phone. It's still in the cloud. Mason's eyes widened. That's proof. You could take that to the FBI? You could. I interrupted. But Holloway owns half the city, remember. Who's to say he doesn't own people in the FBI too? Who's to say this file doesn't disappear the second I hand it over? Then what are you going to do? Mason asked. I looked at him. Then I looked at Eliza, still slumped against her father's shoulder, barely conscious. I'm going to make sure Holloway can't hurt anyone else, I said. And you're going to help me. Mason shook his head frantically. No, I can't. I just got my daughter back. I can't. You don't have a choice, I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a blade. Holloway's men saw you tonight. They know you didn't deliver the file. They know someone interfered. How long do you think it'll take before they come for you again? Before they come for her? Mason's face crumpled. He looked down at Eliza, tears streaming down his face. What do you want me to do? He whispered. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a burner phone. I tossed it to him. You're going to call Holloway, I said. You're going to tell him you got away. You're going to tell him you still have the file, and you're willing to make a deal. Face to face. Just you and him. Mason stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. He'll kill me. No, I said. He won't, because I'll be there first. Put it on speaker, I commanded, my voice low and steady. Judge Mason stared at the burner phone in his hand as if it were a venomous snake. His thumb hovered over the call button. He took a ragged breath, looked down at his sleeping daughter, and then pressed the screen. The line rang once, twice. You have a lot of nerve calling me, Adrian. Grant Holloway's voice filled the cab of the truck. It was calm, dangerously calm. The kind of calm that comes before a storm. It wasn't my fault. Mason blurted out, his voice pitching up in genuine panic. Someone started shooting. I didn't know who it was. I just grabbed the file and ran. And my men? Holloway asked. Are they alive? I don't know. Mason lied, following the script I had whispered to him moments ago. I think one is dead. I didn't stick around to check. Grant, listen to me. I have the file. I have the papers. I just want out. I want my daughter, and I want to disappear. You already have your daughter, Holloway said coldly. My men tell me she's gone. You took her. Yes. In the confusion, I dragged her out. Mason stammered. Look, I'm at a payphone. I'm scared, Grant. I don't want to go to the police. I know what you're capable of. I just want to trade the file for our lives. You take the evidence, and we leave the country. You never see us again." There was a long silence on the other end. I watched the seconds tick by on the phone screen. Holloway was calculating. He was weighing the risk. "Bring the file to the Blackwood quarry," Holloway said finally. "East entrance. 1 hour. Come alone. If I see even a shadow of anyone else, I will finish what we started." "I'll be there," Mason whispered. Click. The line went dead. I took the phone from Mason's trembling hand and crushed it in my grip, tossing the pieces onto the floorboard. "Good," I said. "He bought it." "He's going to kill me," Mason said, his face buried in his hands. "He's not going to let me walk away. You know that." "I know," I said, putting the truck in gear. "That's why you aren't going to be there." I drove them to a motel 3 towns over, a rundown place with flickering neon lights and no cameras in the parking lot. I paid cash for a room. I carried Eliza inside and laid her on the bed. She was still groggy, but she squeezed her father's hand when he sat down beside her. "Stay here," I told Mason, standing by the door. "Do not open this door for anyone. Do not use the room phone. Do not turn on the TV." "Where are you going?" Mason asked, looking up at me with terror in his eyes. I checked the load in my 1911 and zipped up my jacket. "I'm going to the quarry," I said. "I'm going to finish this." "You can't go alone," Mason said. "He'll have a team. He'll have more men like Julian." "I'm counting on it," I said grimly. I walked out into the cold night air. The wind was picking up, howling through the empty parking lot. I wasn't going there to negotiate. I wasn't going there to arrest him. I was going there to do what I should have done 22 years ago when I left the service. I was going to war. I got back in my truck and drove toward the Blackwood quarry. It was a massive, open-pit mine about 10 miles east. High cliffs, deep water at the bottom, and only one way in or out. It was a kill box, and Grant Holloway had just invited me inside. Blackwood quarry looked dead from the road, just dark rock and a chain-link gate, until I got closer and saw the truth. New tire tracks, fresh footprints in the dust, 2 security cameras mounted where there shouldn't have been any. Grant wasn't meeting in a quiet place. He was meeting in a place he already controlled. I parked half a mile out and went in on foot, keeping low along the tree line until I found elevation above the pit. From up there, the quarry was a giant bowl. Floodlights sat on portable towers, aimed at a flat patch of gravel near the waterline like a stage. I set my decoy where he'd see it fast, the manila folder inside a cheap black toolbox, placed on a lone folding table under the brightest light. Not hidden, not clever, just enough to make a powerful man believe the other side was desperate. Then I stepped back into the dark and waited, my earpiece alive with the faint hiss of my own recorder. Headlights cut across the pit. 1 SUV became 2, then 3. They rolled down the slope in a slow line, stopping in a half circle around the table. Grant got out of the middle one. I'd seen his face online earlier, but in person he looked different. Older, heavier around the neck, eyes too calm for a man who ordered violence. He wore a clean coat, polished boots, like he expected the world to move out of his way. 2 men flanked him in tactical gear, Ryder and Quentin, if I had to guess by posture alone. The way they scanned the shadows told me they weren't here for a conversation. They were here to end one. Grant stared at the table and smiled like he'd already won. "Adrian," he called out, voice carrying across the quarry. "You made a mess, but at least you finally got smart." No answer. Grant's smile didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. "Come out. Bring my file." Still nothing. He nodded once, almost bored, and Ryder walked forward, rifle up, checking the toolbox. Quentin moved wide, circling, watching the ridge line where I lay. Grant's voice dropped, but I could still hear him. "If Adrian thinks he can steal from me and live, he's forgotten what kind of man I am." Ryder popped the toolbox open. The folder was inside, right on top. Grant exhaled, satisfied. "There it is." Then he stepped closer, and I saw what he saw. The thin wire taped to the underside of the folder. Not a bomb. Just a string tied to a contact switch. A cheap little truth test. Grant didn't flinch. He looked up into the darkness like he could see straight through it. "You're not Adrian," he said calmly. Ryder raised his rifle toward the ridge. Grant lifted a hand. "No, not yet." He leaned down, picked up the folder with 2 fingers, and laughed under his breath. "Whoever you are, you're grieving. I can smell it." My jaw tightened. Grant opened the folder, flipped through the papers, then tossed it back onto the table like it was trash. "These copies are nothing. The originals are what matter." Quentin shifted, impatient. "Just give the word, Grant." Grant kept his eyes on the dark. "Do you know what I hate? People who think they're heroes because they suffered." My stomach went hard at that. Grant took one slow step closer to the light, like he wanted to be seen. "That kid, Evan, he didn't die over a parking spot. He died because he couldn't mind his own business. He took photos at my port." There it was. Clean. Casual. Like he was talking about a broken shipment. Ryder chuckled once. "And Julian handled it." Grant's mouth curved. "Julian did what he was told. Same as anyone else in this world." My hand stayed steady, but my chest felt like it was tearing open all over again. Grant nodded toward the shadows. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk down, hand me the real evidence, and I'll let you keep breathing." He paused, then added, soft as a bedtime story, "If you don't, I'll go back to your wife. The way I went back to Adrian's daughter." My blood went ice cold, because he said it like he already knew exactly where Tessa was. And my phone, buried on silent in my jacket, vibrated once. Then again, like a heartbeat I couldn't stop. When I finally looked, there was one message on the screen. From an unknown number. "I'm at the motel. Eliza is crying. Hurry." I stared at the phone screen, the white text burning into my retinas. "I'm at the motel." It wasn't a bluff. Grant Holloway wasn't the kind of man who guessed. He had tracked us. Maybe the judge had a second phone I didn't find. Maybe the car I burned had a redundant transmitter. It didn't matter how. It only mattered that while I was here playing soldier in the dirt, someone was standing outside the door where I left a traumatized girl and a terrified father. Down in the pit, Grant checked his watch. The arrogance radiated off him like heat. "Tick-tock," he called out, his voice echoing off the quarry walls. "My associates are very impatient men. And your wife, Tessa, right? She's home alone, isn't she?" That broke it. The cold, calculating sniper part of my brain shut down. The father part took over. I didn't say a word. I didn't negotiate. I shifted my aim. I wasn't using the 1911 anymore. I had the long gun now, the heavy barrel resting on a sandbag I dragged up the ridge. I didn't aim at Grant. I didn't aim at the guards. I aimed at the massive diesel generator powering the portable floodlights. Boom. The shot was deafening in the enclosed quarry. The round punched through the engine block of the generator. Sparks showered the gravel like fireworks, and instantly, the pit plunged into darkness. "Contact!" Ryder screamed. "High ridge. Suppression fire." Muzzle flashes lit up the dark below. Pop, 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 pop. Bullets snapped through the brush around me, tearing leaves and chipping rock. They were firing blind, spraying the hillside in panic. Good. I didn't stay to fight. I needed to be at that motel 5 minutes ago. I rolled backward, sliding down the far side of the embankment until I hit the drainage ditch where I'd stashed my truck. I vaulted into the driver's seat and cranked the engine. As I peeled out onto the access road, my phone buzzed again. "Same number. You're leaving the party early." "That's rude." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and floored it. The speedometer climbed. 80, 90, 100. The old Ford rattled and shook, the engine screaming in protest, but I pushed it harder. Grant hadn't killed me because he wanted me to suffer. He wanted me to choose. He wanted me to feel helpless. 20 minutes later, I screeched into the motel parking lot. My heart stopped. The door to room 104 was wide open. The lights inside were off. I grabbed my pistol and bailed out of the truck before it even fully stopped rolling. I moved to the door, slicing the pie, clearing the fatal funnel. "Mason," I hissed. Silence. I stepped inside, weapon raised. The room was trashed. The lamp was shattered on the floor. The mattress was overturned. There was a spray of blood on the bathroom doorframe. But no bodies. No Judge. No Eliza. I swept the bathroom. Empty. I backed out into the parking lot, my chest heaving. They were gone. Grant had played me perfectly. He drew me out to the quarry so his B team could snatch the leverage back. I was about to get back in the truck when I saw it. On the windshield of my truck, under the wiper blade. A parking ticket. No. A photo. I snatched it up. It was a Polaroid, fresh and developing in the cold air. It showed Tessa, my wife, bound to a chair in what looked like a shipping container. On the white border, written in black marker, "Trade completed. We have the Judge. We have the girl. And now we have your wife. Come to the port. Alone. Gate 4. I crushed the photo in my fist. Grant Holloway had made a fatal mistake. He thought he had taken my weakness. He thought he had leverage. But he hadn't just taken my family. He had taken the only thing keeping me from turning into a monster. I wasn't a rescuer anymore. I was the punishment. I didn't go through Gate 4. I went through the drainage culvert on the north side of the port, the same one I used to crawl through during reconnaissance missions in places with names most people can't pronounce. The pipe was narrow, wet, and it stank of diesel runoff. But it spit me out inside the fence line, invisible. The port was massive. Shipping containers stacked 5 high, cranes looming like steel giants, floodlights carving hard shadows across the asphalt. And somewhere in this maze, Grant Holloway had my wife. I moved between the container rows, silent, methodical. I wasn't rushing. Rushing gets you killed. I checked every corner, every blind spot, listening for voices, for engines, for anything. Then I heard it. A woman crying. I followed the sound to a lit-up section near the water. A single shipping container sat isolated under a spotlight, its doors open. Inside, I could see Tessa tied to a chair, her face bruised, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Standing next to her was Julian. Not Grant. Not a mercenary. Julian. The boy who shot my son. He looked older than in the courtroom photos. Harder. He was holding a pistol loosely at his side, bored, scrolling through his phone with the other hand like this was a chore. My blood turned to ice, then fire. Every muscle in my body screamed to charge in and put a bullet through his skull. But I forced myself to stop, to think. This was bait. Holloway wasn't stupid. He knew I'd come. He wanted me to see Julian. He wanted me emotional. He wanted me to make a mistake. I scanned the perimeter. 2 shooters on the catwalks above the container. Another pair patrolling the far side, near a black SUV. And somewhere, Grant was watching. I couldn't go loud. Not yet. Not until I had Tessa clear. I moved left, circling wide to a stack of containers near the water's edge. I climbed the corrugated steel like a ladder, pulling myself up to the 2nd level, then the 3rd. From there, I had the high ground. I pulled out my rifle, steadied the barrel on the edge of the container, and looked through the scope. Julian was talking now. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Tessa flinch. He leaned close to her face, grinning. My finger brushed the trigger. Not yet. I shifted aim. First shooter, catwalk left. Windage adjusted for the breeze coming off the water. Range, 220 yards. I exhaled halfway and squeezed. Crack. The shooter dropped without a sound. The second shooter spun, scanning for the source. I didn't give him time. Second shot. He fell backward off the catwalk, crashing onto a pallet below. Julian's head snapped up. He looked around, confused. What the hell was that? He shouted into a radio clipped to his vest. Static. No answer. I moved, sliding down the container and sprinting across the gap to another stack. I needed to be closer. Julian grabbed Tessa by the hair and dragged her chair backward into the container, using her as a shield. Show yourself, he screamed into the dark. I know you're out there. I was 30 feet away now, hidden behind a forklift. Julian's voice cracked. Your wife dies if you don't come out. I'll do it. I swear. He pressed the barrel of his pistol against Tessa's temple. She sobbed, her whole body shaking. I stood up. "Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the night like a blade. He spun toward me, eyes wide, gun still against Tessa's head. "Who are you?" I stepped into the light, slowly, hands at my sides. No weapon visible. "I'm Evan's father." The color drained from Julian's face. "The kid you shot in a parking lot." I continued, my voice calm, cold. "The kid whose only crime was taking a picture of your daddy's illegal dumping operation." Julian's hand trembled. I didn't have a choice. Your father gave you a gun and sent you to kill a 19-year-old, I said. You pulled the trigger. Not him. You. Stay back. Julian screamed, pressing the gun harder against Tessa's head. I'll kill her. No, I said. You won't. Why not? Julian shouted, his voice breaking. Because you're not a killer, Julian, I said, taking another step. You're a coward. You only shoot people who can't fight back. His jaw clenched. Shut up. Evan didn't even see you coming, did he? I said. He was loading his car. He had his back turned. And you walked up and emptied a magazine into his chest. Shut up. Julian was crying now, the gun shaking in his hand. I took another step. You want to know what his last words were? Julian's face twisted. He said, why? I whispered. That's all he got out before he died. Just. Why? Julian's grip loosened. Just a fraction. Just enough. I moved. I closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. The gun fired. Bang. The round punching into the container wall. I slammed his hand against the steel frame. The pistol clattered to the ground. Julian tried to swing at me. I caught his fist and drove my knee into his ribs. He crumpled, gasping. I didn't stop. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him out of the container, slamming him face first onto the asphalt. Victor, stop. Tessa screamed behind me. But I couldn't stop. My hands were around Julian's throat. His eyes bulged. He clawed at my wrists, but I was stronger. I was angrier. Victor, please. Tessa's voice broke through the rage. I looked up. She was still tied to the chair, tears streaming down her face. Don't, she whispered. Don't become him. I looked down at Julian. His face was purple. His eyes were rolling back. I let go. He gasped, coughing, rolling onto his side. I stood up, chest heaving, and turned to Tessa. I cut her restraints with my knife and pulled her into my arms. I'm sorry, I whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry. Behind us, slow, mocking applause echoed across the port. I turned. Grant Holloway stepped out of the shadows, flanked by 4 armed men. Bravo, Grant said, smiling. Touching. Really. But you forgot something, Victor. He raised his hand. Spotlights exploded to life all around us. Dozens of them. And standing in a circle, weapons raised, were at least 20 men. Grant's smile widened. You walked into my kingdom. Tessa's hand found my wrist, squeezing hard enough to hurt. She was shaking, but her voice came out clear. Victor, don't. Grant Holloway stood 10 feet away, smiling like this was a board meeting he owned. His men tightened the circle. Rifles up, fingers ready. Julian lay on the ground behind me, coughing and spitting, one hand pressed to his ribs. He looked up at Grant like a kid who wanted approval. Grant didn't even glance at him. Grant's eyes stayed on me. You hear that, Victor, he said softly. That's the sound of the world choosing me. Every time. I kept my body between him and Tessa. Let her walk. Grant tilted his head. You're in no position to negotiate. I nodded once, slow. I'm in the only position that matters. His smile twitched. Oh. I reached into my jacket. Not fast, not dramatic, and pulled out my phone. I held it up, screen facing him. Grant's men shifted, muzzles tracking my hands. I tapped the screen and showed him a simple timer. A countdown. 2 minutes and 41 seconds. Grant's eyes narrowed. What is that? A dead man's switch, I said. When it hits 0, everything gets sent. Evan's photo. The port dumping file. The audio from Judge Mason's car. And the part you just admitted out loud. Grant laughed once, but it sounded forced. You think I care about headlines. I think you care about handcuffs, I said. And I think you care about the people who'll flip on you the second they smell prison. Grant stared at the timer like he wanted to crush it with his mind. Tessa whispered, Victor, what did you do? I made sure Evan didn't die for nothing, I whispered back. Grant stepped closer, his boots crunching gravel. You're bluffing. I shook my head. I'm tired. That's not the same thing. He pointed at Tessa with 2 fingers, casual. She's not leaving. Not unless you give me that phone and the originals. The originals aren't here, I said. Grant's eyes flashed. Liar. I'm not, I said. I learned something from you, Grant. Leverage lives somewhere else. The timer ticked down. 2 minutes and 7 seconds. Grant's voice dropped, quiet and sharp. Ryder, bring them out. My stomach sank. A container door screeched open behind Grant, and 2 men dragged Judge Mason into the light. His hands were zip-tied. His lip was split. He looked barely upright. Then Eliza stumbled out behind him, wrists bound, face streaked with tears. Tessa made a broken sound beside me. No, no, no. Mason's eyes locked on mine. Pure apology. Pure fear. Grant watched my face like he was studying a wound. There, he said. Your little hero story. 1 father, 2 women, 1 judge, 1 messed up kid on the ground. So tell me, Victor, who do you save first? The timer hit 1 minute. 1 minute. I swallowed, tasting metal. I forced my voice steady. You want the phone, Grant? Fine. Tessa jerked toward me. Victor. I kept my eyes on Grant. You let Tessa walk to my truck. You let Eliza walk with her. And you cut Mason loose. Grant's smile returned, slow. And if I say no, I lifted the phone slightly higher. Then you're about to become the most famous man in this port. Grant's jaw tightened. For the first time, the calm slipped. He leaned in, so close I could smell his cologne. You know what I think, Victor? I think you won't do it. Because you're not like me. You still care about being a good man. I stared straight back. You're right. His eyes brightened, like he'd won. Then I added, that's why I planned this before I came. Grant froze, just for a beat. And from somewhere in the dark container rose. A single red laser appeared on Grant's chest. Not mine. His smile vanished. The red that didn't waver. It sat perfectly still over Grant Holloway's heart, glowing like a small, angry star against his expensive wool coat. Grant looked down at his chest, then up at the darkness above the container stacks. His face, usually so composed, so arrogant, finally cracked. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Drop your weapons, a voice boomed from the shadows. It wasn't a single voice. It was amplified. Megaphones. Suddenly, the floodlights shifted. Beams of light cut through the night from the tops of the cranes, blinding Grant's men. This is the FBI. You are surrounded. Drop your weapons, or we will fire. Grant spun around, looking for an escape, but there was none. Tactical teams were rappelling down the sides of the containers. Armored vehicles smashed through the chain-link fence at the perimeter, sirens wailing. You. Grant hissed, turning back to me. You led them here. I didn't lead them, I said, my voice calm. I just gave them the address. I hadn't come to the port alone. When I left the motel, I didn't just drive blindly. I made one call. Not to the local police, Grant owned them. Not to the news. I called the one number in the files Judge Mason gave me. A federal investigator who had been trying to build a case against Holloway for years, but never had the smoking gun. Tonight, I was the smoking gun. It's over, Grant, I said. Julian, still on the ground, started sobbing. Dad, help me. Grant looked down at his son with pure disgust. Shut up, he spat. Just shut up. But it was too late. The FBI team swarmed in. Grant's mercenaries didn't even try to fight. They knew the math. They dropped their rifles and raised their hands. I watched as they cuffed Grant. He didn't fight, but his eyes never left mine. They burned with hate. This isn't over, Victor. he snarled as they dragged him toward the armored truck. I have lawyers who cost more than your life. I'll be out by morning. I walked over to him, stopping just inches from his face. No, I said softly. You won't. Because the files I sent, they didn't just go to the FBI. They went to your partners overseas. The ones you were stealing from to pay off the judge. Grant's face went white. You're not going to prison, Grant, I whispered. You're going into protective custody. If you're lucky. He didn't say another word. The fight drained out of him, leaving him looking old and small. I turned away. I didn't care about him anymore. I walked over to Tessa. An agent was cutting her zip ties. She stood up and threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my chest. She was shaking, but she was alive. It's okay, I whispered, holding her tight. It's done. We're going home. I looked over her shoulder. Judge Mason was sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Eliza was next to him, holding his hand. He looked up and met my eyes. He nodded, a slow, humble acknowledgement. He knew he was going to prison. He knew his career was over. But he also knew his daughter was safe. And that was enough. The first morning, we didn't go back to the house immediately. We couldn't. It felt too big, too empty. Instead, we drove to the coast. We sat on the hood of my truck, watching the sun come up over the ocean. The sky turned from purple to pink to gold. Tessa leaned her head on my shoulder. Do you think he knows? She asked softly. Who? Evan. Do you think he knows what you did? I looked out at the water. I thought about the rage that had fueled me for months. The sniper rifle in the trunk. The need for blood. But looking at the sunrise, I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt quiet. I think he knows we didn't let him fade away, I said. I think he knows we fought for him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo, the one of Evan in his work uniform, giving the thumbs up. I held it up against the horizon. We got him, kid, I whispered. Tessa took the photo from my hand and kissed it gently. Then she looked at me, her eyes clear for the first time in months. So what now? She asked. I took her hand. Now we live. We live the life he didn't get to have. We stop surviving, Tess. We start living. We sat there for a long time, just breathing. The nightmare was over. The grief would always be there, like a scar, but the wound had finally stopped bleeding. Justice isn't about bringing people back. It's about making sure the people who took them never hurt anyone else again. And as I watched the waves crash against the shore, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't a sniper anymore. I wasn't a hunter. I was just a father. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Author's note to you. That was a heavy journey, wasn't it? We went from the courtroom to the scope, from despair to justice. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button.